Today's talk is on chapter 14 of this book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation, with Trangu Rinpoche's commentary. And the chapter is on the perfection of patience. This is in the section where he talks about the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections. And as usual, when these 6 perfections are talked about, the one on patience usually has the most material in it, because this is such an important topic, patience. It's the remedy for anger, and anger is so very, very destructive. And in the world today, in 2021, there's huge amounts of anger, and as a result, huge amounts of suffering. And as usual, as we've been going through the other perfections, it is divided into 7 different sections, and they all have the same name for the perfections. The first one is the reflection on the faults and virtues. So the faults of anger, and again, patience is the remedy for anger. So this is why we want to strengthen and develop our patience. So the faults of anger are, in the short term, it destroys the virtue that we have accumulated. It is said that one moment of anger can destroy lifetimes and lifetimes of virtue that we have accumulated. Not just the virtue that we've accumulated in our present lifetime. The second short-term fault is that it's just plain contrary to traveling the path. That as we travel the path, we want to develop and strengthen our loving kindness and compassion. And anger is the opposite, the absolute opposite of loving kindness and compassion. It's wanting to cause harm to another being, to an enemy. And since it is contrary to the path, you can never really find happiness or peace by indulging in anger. The third short-term fault of anger is that it creates constant stress and pain. That you can't enjoy life if you're angry. That you'll lose friends and those that are close to us because of your rough and unpleasant behavior. And the fourth short-term fault is that anger creates problems, difficulties, and obstacles in our lives. Now, in terms of the benefits, in terms of the ultimate, patience is the most important quality to accomplish Buddhahood. That's a very important point, that this has a carryover effect on all the other paramitas, and it enhances all the other paramitas. So the temporary benefits of engaging and developing our patience is that we will attain qualities, we will accumulate virtue, we will be on the path, and we will have a peaceful mind. We will not have all this stress in our lives. We'll have harmonious relationships and have many friends. And good friends will actually support us on the path if they are Dharma friends. And he says that we'll have few, if any, obstacles to our daily life and our practice. And finally, that we will achieve Buddhahood quickly. So that is in the first section, the reflection on faults and virtues. Point 2 is titled Definition. The definition here is a good quote. It's on page 213 in my edition of the book. Patience is an undisturbed mind and an absence of retaliating reactions. Another quote on that same page is, the essence of patience is not to brood over what has been done to us and not to think about it, but just leave it and forget it. So to go on here, an important element of patience is realizing the past is past. We don't have to relive the past. We don't have to go back and try to have a better past or correct the past. Just drop the whole issue. When you find yourself being caught up in negative thoughts about what people have done to you, just drop it. Drop any grudges. The harm has already happened and it is in the past. And when we let go of holding on to the past, the harm is gone. But if we hold on to it, we can hold on to it for 10, 20, 30 years. We can go to our grave holding on to things that have happened to us very early in our lives. I remember being at a teaching that Khandro Rinpoche gave, and I can't tell you what the topic was, but in the middle of it, she just plain stopped. This was given in Milwaukee, and she said something like, you Westerners can hold on to things for 10, 20, 30 years with a, I guess, a tone of, I just can't leave this, because most Tibetans would not hold on to things that long. And Pema Chodron, she has said that anger is like drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die. So this is the definition of this undisturbed mind with the absence of retaliating reactions. And the point is to just let go, to drop it. In the Bodhisattva's way of life, Shanti Deva talks about being like a piece of wood. You beat a piece of wood with another stick and it just lies there. It doesn't try to retaliate. Now, that doesn't mean if someone's attacking you, you don't try to get away or you don't try to protect yourself. But what it does mean is that you don't hold on to a grudge and plot retaliation. The next section is classification. And so he divides this up into 3 parts. And in the next section, it's discussed in more detail. So the first classification is to not be disturbed by the harm done to you by others. The second is not being disturbed by your own suffering. And the third classification is patience when practicing and studying the Dharma. So section 4 is the characteristics of each classification. So the first classification is patience relating to not being disturbed by the harm done by others. So not reacting, not retaliating to harm that others do to us. And he has a list of 9 remedies that come from the Bodhisattva's way of life, and 5 remedies that come from teachings that Atisha brought to Tibet. And we'll go over to the 9 remedies from the Bodhisattva's way of life first. So first of all, contemplate that these people, these beings that harm us, have no freedom. They are being controlled by anger, and that anger is the problem, not the person. Karmapa has said, if you are getting beaten up by a stick, the stick isn't the problem, it's the person controlling the stick that is the problem. And so these people that are causing us harm, they are controlled by anger, and anger is the problem. The second is to contemplate and consider that the harm we are experiencing is due to our own karma, that we have done things in perhaps previous lives and perhaps this life that has made this suffering of ours possible. And it's not our enemies that are cause of this suffering of ours, it's our own previous actions. The third contemplation is to consider the harm to be the fault of our own body. And what that means is that we are in our present body because of our attachment to an inferior body. That our human bodies are very easily harmed. And as a result of that, we're very vulnerable to pain and suffering. But it is our fault that we are in this vulnerable human illusory body. The next contemplation is to consider that both you and the troublemaker are equally at fault, that you must have done something to make the other person angry in some way or another. And so think about that. It's so easy to think that I have nothing to do with this. I'm totally blameless and innocent. Why is this always happening to me? So now the sixth point to consider and contemplate is consider the benefits that you receive from this person that you are trying to develop your patience, and you might say rein in your anger. It is said that our worst enemy is our best teacher, because this really strengthens our patience, that we don't have to be very patient with our friends because they're kind to us. But a person that is very, very difficult to have patience for, they are the ones that really strengthen our ability to be patient. It's a bit like building up your muscles, that if you lift a half a pound so many minutes a day, you'll build up your muscles a little bit. If you lift 10 pounds the same amount of time, you build up a lot more muscle. So the more difficult it is, the more patience that we develop, and the stronger that our patience becomes. The next one is to consider gratitude, to think about gratitude, that this enemy is extremely kind to us, because Gampopa points out that there are many objects of generosity. We have no trouble finding an object of generosity, whether it be an animal or a human. There is just so much suffering in the world that it's not a matter of finding an object of generosity, but limiting how many people we can benefit. I can tell you this, that every day my snail mailbox and my email mailbox are full of, shall we say, opportunities to practice generosity. They want me to donate money to this cause, to that cause. And if I do, they share my information, and I get 10 more organizations that want me to donate to them. So there's no problem finding places to be generous and donate money. But we really don't have that many enemies. And so there are just not that many objects of patience to practice on. And so he uses the analogy that it's like finding a precious jewel, this enemy that we need to practice patience with. So try to have an element of gratitude towards this troublemaker. The next point is consider how all the Buddhas are pleased, that they will see that we are not causing harm and that we are capable of having patience. And finally, the ninth point is to consider the great benefits, that when we practice patience, those around us won't be harmed by us. They will be happier. And when we attain Buddhahood, we can help others do the same. So these are the points that Shantideva brings up. Now, the next are points that Atisha brought up when he was teaching in Tibet. So and some of these are close. You could say they're overlapping. They're presented a little bit differently, but there's a lot of overlap here. The one is to think about feeling close to the one that has harmed us. That You have this shared humanity. The person that has harmed you, they don't want to suffer. And realize that we have this shared humanity. And the second point is that everything depends on interdependent conditions, and that this person may have been a friend of yours in the past, and they could easily be a friend of yours in the future. And it could even be a closer relationship than that. They could have been of a father or a mother, a child in the past, and they could easily be that in the future. So remember interdependence, and we don't really know past lives, and we don't know the relationship we have with this troublemaker. The third point is think of impermanence. Realize that this troublemaker is going to die at some point anyway. And so if you feel that you have a lot of anger towards the person, well, realize that person is going to die anyway. You don't need to speed that process up. And the fourth point is think of the suffering of these troublemakers, that these people are already suffering. They will experience more suffering in the future. They're accumulating a lot of negative karma. And we really don't want to add to that suffering. That what we want to develop is the aspiration to reduce their suffering. People that are happy and content and satisfied really don't cause a lot of harm to other people. So the last point here in this section is think of fully embracing all beings. That if we retaliate, the pain that we experience, the pain that's made us angry, is still there. We still experience it. You can't erase that. So realize the limits of retaliation. And also, if we retaliate, this sets up the karma for us to be harmed by others in the future. And so he tells the story of the two. I think in this story, I've heard this different ways, that the man that is going to be traveling and is barefooted, and the ground is full of all kinds of things that can hurt the feet, whether they be thorns, rocks, and so forth. And the question is, do I cover the path with leather, or do I cover my feet with leather? And of course, in order to cover the path with leather, meaning wherever we go in life, we would have to cover the world in leather. Whereas if we put sandals on, our feet are protected no matter where we go. And so patience is like that. If we develop patience, no matter where we go, we will remain, you might say, free of anger and the suffering that anger causes. So the second classification of patience is patience of accepting suffering. So suffering is the nature of conditioned existence. It is, you might say, the essence of conditioned existence. The Buddha talked about birth, old age, sickness, and death, that this goes with conditioned existence. So we need to avoid thinking that we are being singled out or experiencing more suffering than others. So we try to avoid taking this suffering personally, thinking that somehow or another my life is filled with more suffering than other people. I suffer more than just about everybody else in the world. Poor me, poor me, poor me. And it's easy to go in that direction, but it is a fruitless direction to go in, and it just magnifies the suffering. Here is a quote on page 224. The best thing to do in the face of suffering is to accept it and to think that there are ways to go beyond suffering and to gain freedom from suffering. So it's important to look at our situation, the kinds of suffering we're experiencing, and how we're relating to it. And when we start going, poor me, poor me, poor me, I'm suffering more than other people, to just drop it and realize that that really isn't the case. You are focused much too much on yourself. So the second, you might say, remedy for this, helping us accept suffering with patience, is that we can use the suffering to go beyond suffering. That our suffering, our suffering is small compared to the big picture. You could call it over-focusing. That we are just focusing in on the suffering in our life and missing everything else that's going on in our life. And that this suffering and attaining patience, developing more and more patience, is putting in, you could say, the palm of our hand, the path to liberation. That, as was said at the beginning of this chapter, that patience is the most important paramita in terms of attaining liberation. So to understand that the suffering comes from our negative actions in the past, the reason why we have a human body and have taken rebirth in samsara is that we've had a lot of good karma accumulated in our past lives, but we also have a significant amount of negative karma, or we would be in a pure land by now. And we can, I guess this is a good way to put it, be motivated and have the aspiration to overcome the inner enemy, which is anger. To have the motivation to go beyond suffering, and that to understand that the enemy will die anyway. This was brought up in the previous section, but here, the enemy will die anyway. We don't need to destroy the enemy. So that was in the section describing the patience of accepting suffering. The third category here is the patience in understanding the Dharma. And this talks about discouragement. And quite honestly, whether you are involved in samsaric activity or Dharma activity, if you are discouraged, you are setting yourself up to not accomplish what you want to accomplish. He doesn't mention specifically the term self-deprecation, but discouragement and self-deprecation are actually a form of laziness. It is saying, well, you know, some people can develop patience, but I can't. There's something wrong with me. I can't do it. And so you don't even try. Before you even get to the starting line, you decide that you can't do it, don't want to do it, or whatever. And you don't even get to the starting line. Or if you do, you don't get very far because you run out of motivation. And it's a form of laziness. And it's good to recognize this about discouragement and self-deprecation, that this keeps us from progressing. The Dharma is worth practicing in the long run. And it might not seem like we are getting anywhere, but it is because we are not in it for the long run, the long haul, you could say. So it's very important to realize that discouragement and self-deprecation is a form of laziness, and it completely stops you on the path. It's really very, very destructive. So when the thought comes in, well, yes, but, and then you've got these excuses, drop the excuses. If you think, well, that person can do that, they're very good at that, but I can't do that, drop the I can't. So I'm going to go on to point 5 here of these 7 points. This is one thing about Gampopa is he liked to list things. And so within each point, there's more lists. And then with them, there's sometimes even more lists. And this is the way Gampopa wrote. And I think it was the style of writing at that time. So the 5th of the main 7 points is increase. So as we develop more and more patience, our powers of primordial wisdom, the wisdom of awareness and dedication, all of these increase. And these are the same for all 6 paramitas, and I've talked about them in more depth in the past talks. The 6th point is perfection, and that is that our patience attains perfection and made pure through the understanding of emptiness and through our compassion. And then finally, the result is the ultimate Buddhahood, liberation, escape from samsara. So that's the ultimate result, the ultimate benefit. The relative result or benefit is what are called the ordinary accomplishments of long life, fame, no sickness, and so forth. And he kind of finishes up by saying what's really important with patience is to make the practice of patience a habit. And when it becomes a habit, it becomes much easier. The comment, it was as much a comment as a question, is that having been in India, I see people with much more difficult circumstances having more patience than in this country. And is it a particular, or maybe the observation was, it seems to be even more difficult in the United States and perhaps developed countries to have patience than in these developing countries. And that may be, but we are not doing, you might say, a comparative, comparing different societies. We're working with ourselves. It's about us and not others. what I have observed is that speed, whether it is driving, just being in a hurry, walking, as you're going through your day, being in a hurry to get through the task that you're working with right now, that speed, being in a hurry, very, very quickly transforms into anger when the slightest little obstacle pops up. Road rage is what happens when you're on the highway. But waiting in line to check out at the grocery store, waiting for the red light to turn green, waiting for your device to boot up or download something, that all of these give us opportunities to practice patience. And when it gets right down to it, if we try to maintain a certain amount of mindfulness, we find that we have unlike what Gampopa wrote back close to 1,000 years ago, that we have limitless opportunities to practice patience that don't even necessarily have anything to do with people. It has to do with our digital devices. It has to do with our car when it needs routine maintenance, when the tire goes flat, when all these little minor inconveniences that we blow up into huge deals. The questioner is right. It's very difficult to practice patience, but it is very fruitful, and it requires a lot of effort and a lot of diligence, and keep going rather than, oh, I can't do that. This is too difficult. Other people can do that. And we want to avoid laying the blame on the society that we were born into. Again, it's really easy to think, I am the way I am because of where I was born or who my parents were and so forth. And we're giving up our freedom. When we blame, that's one of the 8 worldly concerns. When we blame and saying, I am the way I am because of things I have no control over, we're just saying, well, I don't want to change. Well, the comment after that last answer was, again, going back to all the suffering in India and impermanence. And I've been to India a number of times, and there's no question that there is poverty that is incredibly vast, and huge amounts of suffering. So many street people, so many beggars, and on and on and on and on. But the thing is, if we hold on to this, it just increases the suffering that we experience. When I am there, I will give money, sometimes to beggars. I prefer to give it to organizations that help needy people, where it might be distributed a little more equitably or to a larger group of people. But the point is, if you hold on to the vast amount of suffering in the world, it will pull you down. You will get depressed. You will feel powerless. You will feel that this is, the only thing there is in the world. Whereas all of these beings have Buddha nature, and that there's much more going on here than suffering. The same thing with in this country, that if we hold on to the problems and just keep holding on and holding on and holding on, the stress builds up. We don't benefit anybody. We don't benefit ourselves. I think I gave this example recently. Let's just say this little singing bowl, it doesn't weigh very much. But if I hold it above my head for a half hour, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. If I could hold it up there for an hour, it would be incredibly heavy. I might be having muscle spasms. And it's that way with suffering, that yes, touch the suffering that you see in the world, touch your own suffering, but let go of it. Don't hold on to it, because it will become overwhelming. I'm going to be holding a mindfulness retreat here. This is where mindfulness comes in, is focus on what's happening right now in the present moment, rather than what happened in the past or what could happen in the future or what you're imagining happening right now somewhere else in the world. That these are very limited. You're over-focusing. You're just seeing what you are looking for, and you're not seeing anything else. A good example would be, maybe I should try this with any of you. I will hide a $100 bill in our group shrine room and say, if you can find that in 5 minutes, it's yours. And then at the end of 5 minutes, I will say, go put the shrine room back in the shape it was when you entered. Well, I don't know. You know, everything's going to be all over the floor. It looks like I had raccoons in there. But that's the point, is to be focused on what's happening right now, to touch and go, or touch and let go.